Heck yeah. What did we learn yesterday? Did we learn about the anatomy of an HTML element? So what's that business between the angle brackets up there? What do we call that? That part. Yeah. That's a tag. So what's that make this? A closing tag. Yeah. So what's the whole thing? An element. Right. Elements consist of two tags generally. Yep. And so what is that? What are class and ID? What part of an HTML element are those? Identifier. Say again? Identifier. Not what I'm looking for. So as you know, those are tags. The whole thing's an element. So what are things like ID and class? What are those in general? Yeah. They're attributes. Correct. Very good. That was real specific with my question because I said, what are class and ID? And someone answered class and they're the class and the ID. Yes, thank you. Thank you for answering the question with the question. So what about hello world? It is text. It's the text content. Yep. So whatever's between the opening and closing tag would be the contents. And in this case, it's text. So yeah, you can get to that with text content. We learned about selector syntax, some very basic selector syntax. So if we wanted to grab this element by its element type, not using the class or ID in any way, but just to grab an element like this using its element name, it's the type of element, what would that selector be? Close, making it harder than it has to be. If we're just doing it by the element name, just P. Yep. So the easiest selector in the world is just finding elements by the type of element. Now what if we did want to do it by ID? So this one would be, yeah, hash main. Target it by its ID. If we wanted to find it by its element name and its ID, be real specific, p hash main. Make sense? No. If this is going inside like query selector, this whole thing would be a string. You'd have quotes around the outside. But no, not within the string, you would not put quotes there, yeah. No. Yeah, we're going to talk about the fact that there's no difference. What about class name? We didn't really talk about it. Does anybody happen to know the selector for targeting it by class name? Dot, yeah. So dot greeting would grab this one. Difference between ID and class. One important difference is only one element on the page should have any given ID value, but many elements can have the same class. So not that the browser is just going to refuse to render the page or anything if you try to give more than one thing an ID, but it may behave unpredictably because it's not in the spec.
So if I were to take so I can put multiple paragraphs and headings in one class.
Yeah, you could say, yeah.
To change all the font colors.
Correct, yeah, you could put class equal greeting on any number of things and style them all red or whatever. Yep, absolutely. We talked about the DOM. What's the DOM? Document Object Model. So we write HTML. And then the browser parses that and builds a little tree structure to represent the document, and that's called the DOM. And that's how we interact with what's on the page. Once it's done that initial parse, the HTML is irrelevant. It's not really HTML anymore, it's the DOM. And that's what we really interact with. So if you were to look at that Elements tab that we looked at really briefly, that's going to show you the current state of the DOM, which may or may not match our HTML, our original HTML. Because there could very easily be a whole lot more in the DOM than was there in the static HTML file. So that is how the document is represented in the browser, and that's how we interact with it. So if we wanted to find all of the elements on the page that match a given selector, like P or P hash main or whatever, What function do we call? Document dot what? Document is how we interact with the DOM. Document dot John. Query selector. Query selector all would get all of the matches. We didn't really use it, but we talked about it. So query selector all will give you all of the paragraphs in this case in an array-like thing that's called a node list. To get just one, query selector. And it'll get you the first match, the first element that matches that selector. And having selected something, once we have a DOM element, how would we get the content, whatever text is inside of it? So I save this to a variable, I call it main or something. Main dot what would get me, the text that's inside. Value? So value would get, if it's an input or something, if it's an input, that would get you what's typed in the input. But if it's something like a paragraph or something like that, the stuff that comes between the opening and closing tags. Yeah, Mia? Inner HTML will get you the full contents in HTML. So if there's, like a list in there, it'll give you that whole structure as HTML. What if you just want the text that's in there and you don't want the HTML? Yeah. Say one little, text content. So text content would get you just the text. Inner HTML would get you everything in HTML format, so you'll actually see the tags and stuff. Yep, both get the contents. Today, eventually, we will talk more about functions and variable scope, as those two topics are very closely related. And we'll dig into the homework in a little more detail and talk about how we do all that stuff, do some more DOM manipulation, and just generally have a grand time. You ready? You with me? Woo! Thank you.